Meat stock versus bone broth. Let's clear this up for good. Meat stock is made with 80% meat and 20% bones. There's 3 methods of cooking: stovetop, oven, or a crock pot. If you're extremely histamine intolerant, stovetop or an oven at 300 degrees Fahrenheit would probably be your best option. My preferred option is the oven at 200 to 220 degrees Fahrenheit. If you don't feel very comfortable leaving your oven on for a long period of time, you can use a crock pot on low. Let's start with beef, lamb, venison, or bison stock. You'll start with a stock pot, a Dutch oven, or a crock pot, and you'll fill it with bone that has meat on it. If I'm using, for instance, a rump roast, which is a small bone and a lot of meat, I will add an extra marrow bone or extra knuckle bone in with it. In this picture, I have venison neck and spine. Then we'll add filtered water, salt, pepper, bay leaf. In this picture, I also added allspice and clove. You're welcome to add some vegetables like onions, carrots, celery to this, but I like to keep it simple. When it comes out of the oven, it's absolutely fall off the bone. Once you debone it, you'll have a pile of bones, a pile of meat, and a couple quarts of stock. For poultry stock, you can start with a whole chicken, or a whole duck, or a whole rabbit. But I actually prefer to cut the legs, the leg quarters, and the wings off my chicken because I like to either grill or roast those. So I'm left with this breast piece. So I'll take a couple of breast pieces and I'll add them to a Dutch oven. Now at this point you can also add the feet and the heads if you have them. And you'll add filtered water, salt, pepper, bay leaf, clove, and allspice if you can tolerate it. You can also add some vegetables if you like. When it comes out of the oven, it is absolutely fall off the bone to perfection. And when you're done deboning it, you'll have a pile of bones, a pile of meat, and a couple quarts of stock. Please do not fill the jar up all the way to the top. You definitely need to be about an inch below the neck before it goes into the freezer. Otherwise, it will crack the jar. We don't eat turkey very often, about twice a year. So normally I roast a turkey. But when I'm done roasting it and I'm busy carving it, I notice that there's a couple of tougher pieces on the turkey. So I'll keep all those pieces of meat on the turkey and I'll put it all in a crock pot. Just before we go to bed after Thanksgiving, I'll add water, salt, and spices, and I'll switch it on low. The next morning I'll wake up and debone it, where I'll be left with a pile of bones, a pile of meat, and beautiful stock left in the pot. I'll add vegetables from what we had left over from the day before, and I will add the rest of the meat, and we'll have a beautiful breakfast turkey soup after Thanksgiving. The last kind of stock is fish stock. We start with a couple of heads of fish. You can also use the skin that you used after you filleted the fish or the fins. Now this is a grouper and a snapper head that I have here, and I live in Florida. I'm sure if you live in Alaska, you probably use halibut or salmon. Then we'll add filtered water, bay leaf, and black peppercorns. I do not add salt to my fish stock because I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet. And if I'm making something like a miso soup, taking miso in there, it's very salty. So I don't want to have to deal with salt in my stock already. My preferred method is putting the crock pot outside my garage because I do not care for smelling like fish all day long in my house. You're welcome to use stovetop or the oven, but yet, if you want to deal with fish smell, that's your deal. Now the next one is bone broth. That's made with 90% bones and 10% meat. My preferred method, or the preferred method rather, is using a crock pot on low. Bone broth cooks for 24 to 72 hours. So I don't care to have something on stovetop for 72 hours or even a day, or have to keep monitoring something that's in my oven or it's filling my oven up and I can't use it for other things. You do, however, have to monitor your little crock pots. Make sure that you top it off with water every day or so. Make sure that it doesn't dry up. In our house, we have a big bone box. And whenever we eat anything with bones in it, or I cook a whole chicken and make meat stock, whatever bones is left from the meat stock goes into this bone box. So it's all mixed up, all the different kinds of bones. You're welcome to separate them. It's just too much effort for me. So we have mixed bone broth. Whenever this box is full, it fills up exactly 3 crock pots for me. So then I'll add a 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar or any kind of vinegar to these pots. I fill it up with filtered water. I do not add salt in this step, since I don't know what I'm going to do with my broth yet, and I don't have to deal with the amount of salt in the broth already. Once it's filled up, I add it into the shells on a stainless steel table in my garage, because I do not care to smell bone broth for 3 days in a row. The crock pot goes on low, and once it's done, after about sometimes 2 days, sometimes 3 days, however, when I can get to it, it's nice and brown and just a nice deep color. I have a big giant pot that has a strainer in it. You can use whatever straining method you have, but all 3 of the contents of the crock pots fit into this pot. And then I'll strain out the bones, and I'm left with the beautiful broth at the bottom. And I'll restrain them through a funnel into mason jars. And right here, they're filled up just below the neck, ready for the freezer. I have a nice stand-up freezer in my garage, and the door is the perfect place for me to store broth. And in this door, there's different levels for meat stock, there's different levels for a jus, there's different levels for a ready prepared soup, and different levels for bone broth. At the very end, we're left with the bones that's left in the strainer, and I'll take out the larger bones, and that goes back into the bone box again for another time. And the leftover bones is something that I do make something with, but that's a video for another day. Thank you very much for listening, and hope we cleared up the mystery of bone broth and meat stock.